Welcome back to Sarah Mythology. Last time we were in ancient Mexico. We stood at Teotihuacan in the darkness before the fifth sun existed and watched a humble, diseased god walk into the divine fire without hesitation. We followed Quetzalcoatl east toward the horizon, carrying the wound of his own humanity. We asked the question that the Aztecs never stopped asking: what does existence cost, and who pays? Today we go west, to the edge of the Atlantic, to islands wrapped in mist and rain where the land itself is so old and so saturated with story that you cannot walk across it without stepping on mythology. To a tradition so ancient that even the people who held it could not fully remember where it began. They only knew that it was everywhere, in the hills and the rivers and the thin places where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the spirits grew as translucent as morning fog. We are going to the Celtic world, to Ireland, to the mythological tradition preserved in manuscripts written by medieval monks who were doing their best to record stories that had been alive in the mouths of poets for thousands of years before anyone wrote them down. And we are going to meet some of the most vivid, most psychologically complex, most hauntingly beautiful figures in all of world mythology. The Tuatha Dé Danann, the divine race who came to Ireland from the edge of the world and lived beneath its hills. Cuchulainn, the greatest warrior who ever lived, and the fate the gods wove for him before he was born. And the Morrigan. The Morrigan. She is the one this episode truly belongs to. The goddess of fate, of war, of sovereignty, of prophecy, of death. The Great Queen. The Phantom Queen. The shapeshifter who appears as a crow above the battlefield, as a beautiful woman at a river ford, as an old hag washing the armor of those who are about to die. She is the most terrifying divine being in the entire Celtic tradition, and she may be the most philosophically interesting. But let us build the world first. Because without the world, the Morrigan has nowhere to move through. The Irish mythological tradition is organized into cycles, bodies of stories grouped by their subject matter and the kind of time they inhabit. The oldest is the mythological cycle, which tells the stories of the divine beings who inhabited Ireland before the arrival of human beings as the Irish understood them. Then comes the Ulster cycle, the great heroic tradition. Then the Fenian cycle. And the cycles of the kings. We are going to spend our time in the mythological cycle and the Ulster cycle today, because these two bodies of story contain the richest, deepest, most enduring material. The mythological cycle begins with the successive invasions of Ireland. Ireland, in this tradition, was not always inhabited. Wave after wave of peoples came to it, each replacing or transforming the last, each bringing with them new relationships with the divine. The Fomorians were the first significant beings in Ireland, ancient, chaotic, representing the primordial forces of darkness and the sea and the deep places. They were not simply evil. They were old. They were the world before order arrived. Then came the Tuatha Dé Danann. Their name translates roughly as the peoples of the goddess Danu, though Danu herself is a curiously obscure figure in the surviving texts, present more in the name than in the stories. The Tuatha Dé Danann arrived in Ireland from 4 mysterious cities in the north of the world. Their names are Phélias, Gorias, Phineas, and Murias. From each city they brought a sacred treasure that defined the nature of their civilization and their relationship with the divine. From Phélias they brought the Lia Fhéil, the stone of destiny, which cried out when the true king of Ireland stood upon it. From Gorias they brought the spear of Luff, which never missed its mark and from whose wound no one ever recovered. From Phineas they brought the sword of Nuada, from which no enemy could escape once it was drawn. And from Murias they brought the cauldron of the Dagda, from which no company ever went away unsatisfied, a vessel of endless abundance from which every person received exactly what they needed. These 4 treasures are not simply magic objects. They are symbols of the 4 fundamental requirements of a just civilization. The voice of true legitimacy. The force that always finds its mark. The decisive power from which no wrong escapes, and the abundance that satisfies every genuine need. A civilization that had all 4 of these things in right relationship would be a civilization in which justice and abundance coexisted perfectly. The Tuatha Dé Danann fought 2 great battles to establish their place in Ireland. The first battle of Mag Tuired against the Fir Bolg, the people who held Ireland before them. And the second battle of Mag Tuired against the Fomorians, the ancient chaos powers. It is in the context of the second battle of Mag Tuired that we meet the first true expressions of the Morrigan's power. Before the battle, the Dagda, the good god, the great father deity of the Tuatha Dé Danann, met the Morrigan at a river. She was washing herself. He greeted her. They spoke. And the Morrigan told him what she would do in the battle to come. She would destroy the Fomorian king in Dec. She would take from him the blood of his heart and the kidneys of his valor. And she would use her power to tip the balance of the battle in favor of the Tuatha De Danann. She kept her word. The battle was immense, and the victory of the Tuatha De Danann was total. And when it was over, the Morrigan stood on a hilltop and spoke the prophecy of peace and abundance that would follow the battle. She sang in the voice that prophesies both the worst and the best, the darkest and the most radiant possibilities of every moment. This is essential to understanding the Morrigan. She is not a goddess of destruction. She is a goddess of truth. And the truth is that destruction and creation, battle and peace, death and life, are not opposites but the same force moving through different phases. She sees all of it simultaneously. She does not choose sides between the light and the dark. She chooses the side of what is real. Now let us talk about what the Morrigan actually is, because she is more complex than any simple description can contain. She is a triple goddess. She exists simultaneously as three aspects, three divine personalities that are distinct and unified at the same time. The three aspects most commonly named are Badb, Macha, and Nemain, or in some traditions Badb, Macha, and the Morrigan herself as the third, with the Great Queen title referring to the triple entity. Badb is the crow, the battle crow, the one who flies above the battlefield as a great black bird, crying out her prophecies, feeding on the fallen. Her cry was said to be able to cause the death of warriors simply through the terror it inspired. She is the voice of fate announcing itself before it arrives. Macha is the goddess of sovereignty and the land, of the sacred relationship between the king and the earth itself. She is the one whose rights must be respected for the land to be fertile and the kingdom to prosper. She is associated with horses and with the racing of the royal horse fair at Emain Macha, the ancient capital of Ulster. Her most famous story is one of the most devastating indictments of male arrogance in all of world mythology. Macha was a supernatural woman who came to live with a widower farmer in Ulster. She helped his household thrive. She became pregnant. And at the worst possible moment, when she was most deeply pregnant, her husband boasted at the feast of the Ulster king that his wife could outrun the king's horses. The king demanded proof. Macha pleaded for time to give birth first. The king refused. She was forced to race. She ran. She won. And at the finish line she gave birth to twins, dying in the process. But before she died she cursed the men of Ulster. For 9 generations, at the time of Ulster's greatest need, the warriors of Ulster would be struck by the pangs of childbirth, by the weakness and helplessness and pain of labor, and would be unable to fight. This curse, the curse of Macha, is not incidental to the Ulster cycle. It is the engine that drives its greatest story. Every crisis Ulster faces in the mythological tradition is complicated by this curse because the men who should defend it are writhing helpless while one man stands alone on the border. That man is Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn is the greatest hero of the Ulster cycle and the greatest warrior in the entire Irish mythological tradition. His name means the Hound of Cuchulainn, a name he earned as a boy when he killed a blacksmith savage guard dog with his hurling stick and then offered to serve as guard himself until a new dog could be trained. The courage of that gesture, the immediate willingness to accept the consequences of what he had done, is characteristic of everything he becomes. He is the son of the sun god Lugh, conceived supernaturally, marked from birth for greatness and for a short life. Every great hero in mythology who is marked for glory before birth is also, in almost every tradition, marked for an early death. The gods who give the most also take the most. Cuchulainn's most remarkable quality as a warrior is the ryostrad, the warp spasm. When the battle fury comes on him, his body transforms completely. One eye retreats so far into his skull it could not be reached by a heron's beak. The other bulges out so far a wild stallion could sit in the cup it creates. His body spins inside his skin. His hair stands on end and from each hair a drop of blood or a spark of fire appears. The light of a hero, the Lán Leach, blazes from his forehead. He becomes something that is no longer entirely human. Something from the edge of what the human body can contain. This transformation is not random. It is the expression of a truth that martial traditions across the world have recognized. There exists a state beyond ordinary consciousness into which a warrior can enter in extremity, in which the body's normal limitations dissolve and an extraordinary capacity emerges. The Norse called it the berserker state. In various Eastern martial traditions it has different names. In the Morrigan tradition it is the warp spasm. The name and the mythology differ. The phenomenon they describe is the same. Cuchulain's greatest test came in the defense of Ulster during the invasion called the Tain Bois Quailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley. The great Queen Medb of Connaught wanted the brown bull of Cooley, the finest bull in Ireland, because she had determined that her personal wealth must match or exceed her husband's, and the bull was the one thing he had that she lacked. This desire, this precise accounting of parity between a husband and wife, seems almost comically domestic until you realize that in the Irish tradition sovereignty was gendered feminine and the relationship between king and land was understood as a marriage. Medb's insistence on equal standing was a cosmological claim, not merely a personal one. She invaded Ulster with the combined forces of the provinces of Ireland. And she found Ulster helpless. The curse of Macha had struck. Every warrior in Ulster lay writhing in the pangs of labor, unable to rise, unable to fight. Every warrior except Cuchulainn. He was exempt from the curse by virtue of his divine parentage. And so Cuchulainn stood alone on the ford, the river crossing at the border of Ulster, and held the entire army of Ireland at bay. Not through a single great battle but through the ancient heroic convention of single combat. He challenged each champion of Medb's army to fight him one at a time at the ford. And one at a time, through days and weeks of relentless combat, he defeated them all. This section of the Tain, the solo defense of Ulster by a single hero against an entire nation, is one of the most extraordinary sequences in all of ancient literature. Cuchulainn fights through injuries that should be fatal. He is healed supernaturally between combats. He fights until his charioteer leg begs him to rest. He fights against men he loves and respects, bound by the rules of the heroic convention he has accepted to hold the border. And throughout all of it, the Morrigan watches. The relationship between the Morrigan and Cuchulainn is the most fascinating relationship in the entire Ulster cycle. It is unlike any other divine heroic relationship in world mythology. She came to him during the great cattle raid in the form of a beautiful young woman. She told him who she was. She told him she loved him. She told him she had been with him in every battle, helping him when she could. Cuchulainn refused her. He told her he had no time for a woman's company. He was in the middle of a war, and he had no use for her. The Morrigan was the goddess of fate and sovereignty, of the land and its voice, of prophecy and battle. To be offered her love was not a simple romantic gesture. It was an offer of divine partnership, of the fullest possible alignment between a hero and the deepest powers of the world he served. And he rejected it. She told him he would regret it. Then she began to attack him. She came at him as an eel that wrapped around his legs while he fought at the ford. He injured her. She came as a wolf driving cattle across the ford to stampede him. He injured her again. She came as a white red-eared heifer leading a charge. He injured her a third time. Then, later, having been injured 3 times, she came to him in the form of an old woman milking a cow. He was exhausted and thirsty, and he asked her for milk. She gave it to him from 3 of the cow's teats. And with each gift of milk he blessed her. With each blessing, one of her injuries healed. By the time he understood who she was whole again. And she was not cruel about it. She simply acknowledged what had happened. He had healed her. She had tested him. They had found, in this strange roundabout way, a form of relation. But what he had refused at the beginning could never fully be taken back. The fullest alignment was gone. The gates of that fortune were closed. And the Morrigan's prophecy, which she had made at the ford, was still in motion. Cuchulainn would die young. He would die gloriously. And his death would be engineered not by ordinary enemies but by the supernatural forces that operate above ordinary cause and effect. His death, when it came, was a sequence of geis violations. The geis, singular geis, plural geisa, is one of the most distinctive elements of Irish mythological tradition. A geis is a sacred prohibition or obligation placed on a specific person. It can be imposed by a god or by a druid or by fate itself. Some are prohibitions. Cuchulainn must never eat dog meat, because his name means Hound of Culann and the dog is his sacred animal. Some are obligations. A hero must never refuse hospitality. On the day of his final battle, Cuchulainn's enemies, guided by supernatural forces in which the children of those he had killed had their revenge, arranged a sequence of situations in which every one of his geasa was violated in succession. He was offered dog meat in hospitality and had to choose between violating the prohibition against eating it and violating the obligation to accept hospitality. Each violation weakened him. Each crack in the fabric of his sacred obligations took something from his strength. He went to the battle knowing he would not return. He tied himself to a standing stone with his own belt so that he would die on his feet rather than fall. And the Morrigan sat on his shoulder as a crow, confirming that the great warrior was indeed dead only when she landed there unopposed. The crow on the shoulder of the fallen warrior is one of the most enduring images in Irish mythology. Paintings and sculptures made it central. It was the Morrigan's final act of witness. She had prophesied his glory. She had tried to love him. She had fought him. He had healed her. And now she confirmed his death. There is a tenderness in it, even in its starkness, that is difficult to name. She was always with him, even at the end. Now let us draw the connections across the world, as we always do on Sarah mythology. The triple goddess, the divine feminine that exists simultaneously in three aspects representing different phases or faces of the same fundamental reality, is one of the most globally persistent mythological archetypes. We see it in the Greek tradition with the three Morai, the fates who spin and measure and cut. We see it in the Norse tradition with the three Norns who weave destiny. We see it in the Hindu tradition with the Tridevi, the trinity of Sarasvati, Lakshmi, and Parvati, or in the warrior form of the goddess as Durga, Kali, and Kamunda. 3 is the number of completion in mythological thinking. The triple goddess embodies the full cycle of existence in a single divine being. The concept of the geis, the sacred prohibition that defines and limits a hero, appears in different forms across traditions. In the Homeric tradition, Achilles has his heel, the one vulnerability that makes him mortal despite his divine protection. In the Norse tradition, Baldur's invulnerability has its single exception in the mistletoe. In the Indian epic tradition, heroes and demons alike have their specific conditions of vulnerability, their particular geasa that enemies and fates exploit. The idea that greatness is always accompanied by a specific vulnerability, that the most extraordinary human beings are also the most specifically limited, is one of mythology's most consistent observations about the nature of human excellence. And the Morrigan's relationship with Cuchulainn, the divine figure who offers love and is refused and then becomes the instrument of fate, carries a profound philosophical weight. She was not punishing him for refusing her. She was being what she always was. The truth-teller. The fate-speaker. She did not create his doom out of spite. His doom was already written. She simply moved through it with her eyes fully open, which is what she always did. This is the gift of Celtic mythology to the human imagination. A world where the divine is not distant and transcendent but intimate and present and complicated. Where the goddess who prophesies death is the same one who offered love. Where the sovereignty of a land is female and requires acknowledgement and respect. Where the greatest hero is also the most vulnerable, his extraordinary power defined by its specific limits. Where fate is not a trap but a weave, and you are part of the weave whether you know it or not. The Morrigan is still with us. She is still sitting on our shoulders, watching. Not waiting to cause destruction. Waiting to see whether we will acknowledge her. Whether we will look the truth of our lives directly in the face and accept what is actually there, rather than what we wish were there. Cuchulainn did not. Not entirely. Not at the ford when it mattered most. And the price he paid was proportionate to what he turned away from. This has been episode 9 of Sarah Mythology. We walked through the mist of ancient Ireland and found a world where the divine was in the hills and the rivers and the thin places where the wind changes character. We met the Tuatha De Danann with their 4 sacred treasures. We felt the curse of Macha settle on the warriors of Ulster and understood it not as cruelty but as the consequence of disregard. We watched Cuchulainn defend a border alone, warp spasm blazing from his forehead, fighting until there was nothing left. And we stood with the Morrigan at the ford, holding what she offered, and understood what it cost to refuse it. Next time we go to China, to the mythological tradition of one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. To Nuwa, the goddess who created humanity from yellow clay and repaired the broken sky with melted stones. To the Jade Emperor whose court mirrors the bureaucracy of heaven. And to the Monkey King, Sun Wukong, one of the most beloved and most extraordinary characters in all of world literature, a trickster so powerful he declared war on heaven itself and nearly won. The Morrigan is watching. She always was. See you at the next fire.